In today's video, I'm going to be talking about resilience. The title of the new article that I'm completing is Resilience, Thriving in Love and Life. I want to start with talking about how those of us who grew up in an environment, say if we were subjected to neglect or maybe some form of traumatic abuse, other extreme dysfunction, there's often a fragility about us. And because of that, we're more likely to find ourselves drawn to individuals where our relationships become a reenactment of the wounding that carries over from our childhood and adolescence. And also the fact that there's this fragility that we're easily hurt. We take things personally. We tend to get strung out on someone. We find it really difficult to let go. And then we'll talk about what you can do to facilitate the healing of this emotional wounding so that you become much stronger, so that you develop that resilience. I'm Ben Ufana, so let's dive into it. And be sure to click like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And I'll also mention that I'm filming at the moment in the middle of New York City, and the sirens have been incessant today. So I hope that it tones down a bit so I can get through this. Anyway, so recently I got a call from this guy. I'd worked with them some years back, but he had met someone, I think it was on Hinge or one of these dating sites. Initially, she was very reticent, a bit guarded, but he really had a thing for her. And she was starting to open up. The defenses were beginning to come down and they were starting to get closer, and it looked like it could work. But then she distanced from him. And not only that, she just stopped responding to him altogether. And so that left this guy really hurt and a bit confused and wondering what he did wrong and ruminating, trying to make sense of it all. So then he calls me and I go over, work with them, and I notice on one hand, like this guy's very resourceful, high functioning, very capable in many respects, but there's this underlying emotional fragility. And as I was working with this guy, I couldn't help but reflect on many other people I've worked with over the years, that there was a similar fragility, and also making me reflect back on my own past. And once again, I've included so much detail in this new article that I'm just completing. And for that reason, I'm going to refer back to and even read some sections because it's just so much detail that I'd like to include here so that I don't forget anything essential. And for that matter, I would encourage you to look below. If you happen to be seeing this video on YouTube, click on the link and read the more detailed article itself, which will be posted on my blog. Now, as I mentioned before, the vast majority of us who have experienced neglect or some form of abuse or dysfunction invariably internalize these experiences and our subsequent emotional responses. And the fact that most of us have not learned to work effectively with our emotions, what happens is that we have this tendency to reenact these patterns repeatedly through a succession of relationships. As we do, it evokes many of the same kinds of painful emotions, and in many ways, the pattern is becoming more deeply entrenched. And often these patterns continue to perpetuate themselves indefinitely. And those of us who struggle with these patterns, we're more prone to obsessive love, or we tend to form attachments to others who are similarly wounded or who in some way resemble those individuals who initially hurt us. We tend to become entangled in push-pull or other harmful relational dynamics. And what makes it worse is we tend to personalize the hurtful things our partner or that person that we have formed an attachment to says or does. And that tends to leave us feeling hurt and distressed and sad and strung out emotionally. In addition, we have a difficult time letting go. we tend to hold on to these individuals, even though the relationship is unhealthy or destructive for us. And over time, these emotional entanglements that tear us down, they erode our sense of self and our well-being. Now, it can be extraordinarily painful when we find ourselves caught up in an endless cycle of reenactments. But one of the greatest mistakes many of us make is we avoid or suppress our emotions. We distract ourselves. But in doing so, when we push our emotions down, unfortunate thing is that it's reinforcing the dysfunctional patterns that many of us struggle with. And that makes it so much harder for us to let go and to move on, and it prevents true healing from ever occurring. Another common mistake that many of us make is we keep trying so hard to make these relationships work. That in itself is another means through which we're avoiding the pain or the discomfort of the relationship that's just not working. And the reason we do this largely has to do with the fact that we're suppressing our pain, and that drives us to keep trying to hold on to that individual in the relationship that, again, is not working. Our tendency to cling to these individuals and relationships is incredibly self-destructive. Not knowing any better, I too resisted the sadness, the grief, the overwhelming fear of being abandoned again, and other painful emotions. And yet, intuitively, I had this sense that I needed to dive into the depths of the sadness, the grief, those fears of loss, the overwhelming anxiety, just whatever emotions were being triggered in those moments. And it could be excruciatingly painful at times. And yet, I would center my awareness in the depths of those all-consuming emotions, and I would just keep breathing softly, deeply, and continue to do so in some instances for hours on end. And at a certain point, I could feel that the pain, the sadness, these other overwhelming emotions breaking open and beginning to dissolve. In some instances, it was so powerful that I could feel the emotion coming out of my body in waves. And underneath that, I could feel these powerful emanations of warmth flowing from within. As that happened, I felt myself connecting with this deeper inner core of my being and the higher power. Many people, fearing that they're going to be overwhelmed by these emotions and avoid going to the places where they feel so vulnerable. And initially, even for me, diving into the depths of all those painful emotions felt overwhelming. But I found that the more that I could stay present, my capacity to contain these extraordinarily powerful emotions increased. And as that happened, I found that I was able to thoroughly digest whatever I was going through at that time and in that relationship or any other life experience, and all the emotions attached to it. When we can breathe from the depths of these emotions that arise in response to these difficult, distressing, upsetting, or challenging experiences, it has the effect of activating this innate healing intelligence that resides within our bodies and minds. And the emotions that we experience will happen as we're working with this practice. They'll go through a progression. For instance, if maybe our initial response might be anger, but if we stay with that anger and we continue to breathe from the depths of it, maybe the anger will transition to sadness. That sadness, so we keep breathing from that, will transition to this sense of maybe resignation, and we'll come to this place where we're gaining insight into this other person, the situation. Maybe we find ourselves letting go, and there's a coming to terms with. And so instead of staying trapped and fixated on that person or situation or relationship, it brings us to a place where we're better able to flow with life, breathing with the feelings and sensations as they arise. As we continue to work with this practice and it's facilitating the digestive process, it lightens the load. It helps us to, again, dissolve the fixations, the unhealthy attachments, helps us to let go of many of the burdens that we're carrying. And as this happens, we feel calmer, we're able to flow more effortlessly with life. It's critically important for all of us to understand that the stresses we internalize, along with the emotions like anger and resentment, frustration, disappointment, fear, anxiety, sadness, grief, it never just goes away. These stresses and emotions continue to accumulate within our bodies and minds if we're not digesting them. And these undigested stresses and emotions dull our senses. They cause us to become dispassionate, to lose interest, and even experience burnout. These accumulated stresses and emotions also contribute to anxiety, depression, and overwhelm. We often find ourselves pulled in so many directions, caught up in all these dramas playing out in our lives and all the conflicting thoughts and emotions. And we may not even be fully cognizant of the forces driving our words and actions, or the dysfunctional dynamics that we're enacting within our relationships and other areas of our lives. But what I've found is by breathing softly and deeply while fully immersing my awareness in the depths of my own feelings and bodily sensations, I'm able to move past so much of the noise and distraction. I gain more insight, more self-awareness. I become cognizant of these patterns that I've been caught up in or enacting, either in relationships or other aspects of life. This greater awareness and understanding, it's a very important part of healing and transforming these wounded parts of ourselves and cleaning up, whether it's our relationships or other aspects of our lives. I usually spend about 2 to 3 hours a day working with these practices. And no, I'm not always dealing with intense, overwhelming, or distressing emotions or drama or conflict. A lot of times as I'm doing these practices, maybe I'm just experiencing physical sensations in my body. But at the same time, when you consider the challenges that so many of us face in our lives, for instance, we might be dealing with work-related stress, issues in our relationships. For many, there's financial struggles, health-related issues, or challenges that impact our body and mind, concerns about friends and family members. So when you take all that into consideration, there's a lot for us to be processing or that needs to be digested. And just the fact that we're often triggered by people and situations, and these emotions do affect us deeply. Whenever I do find myself confronted with some kind of difficult or challenging situation or person or some issue concerning me, by working with this practice, I'm able to diffuse and digest the stresses and my emotional responses. And that puts me into a far more resourceful space. I get a lot more creative insights as to how I could address the situation, or maybe if it's another individual. And it also enables me to tap into this whole wellspring of creativity. And the time I spend engaged with the world around me is that much more productive and meaningful. Years ago, when I first traveled to Boston, a friend set up a few radio interviews, and then I followed that up with evening classes. And it's like I had a instant ready-made practice. My schedule filled up quickly, and a lot of people continued to work with me for years. And I would travel to Boston 4 times a year. And it usually took me at least 2, but often 3 weeks to see everyone before I could get out of town. But all that began to change as the technology continued to advance and people are getting on smartphones and social media, and they were consuming all this other digital content. In fact, as people were becoming more and more distracted, they were developing what I often refer to as media-induced attention deficit. People's attention span was shortening dramatically. Other thing that I found is that people were less aware of their physical bodies, of their emotions, other aspects of their own internal state of being. So even if there were crucial issues that needed to be attended to, people's awareness was pulled outside of themselves. Namely, their awareness was being pulled into their devices and into their social media feeds. And so because of that, I had to compensate. By that time, I shifted to the East Coast and I was conducting classes on a weekly basis in New York. Every other Tuesday, I would offer classes in the Boston area. And that's what it took for me to keep a practice going because people were so much more distracted and disconnected. And for years, I managed like that. But then when we went into lockdown with COVID in 2020, all that came to an end. No more classes. I had to figure out something else to do. Since that time, I've traveled a lot more to different cities around the country. And I'm also spending a lot more time composing articles and recording videos and lots of hours editing the videos that I post on YouTube that you're watching now, for instance. And all this additional time and effort that I go to reach people demands a lot of me. I very much enjoy the work I do with people, especially when they listen and follow through and they give the healing process that I facilitate an opportunity to work. But so many people these days have extraordinarily short attention span. Many have highly unrealistic expectations. It's a process that takes time, considerable effort, and intervention in order to facilitate the much needed healing. So for me, it can be quite stressful at times when people are not listening or following through. They just show up and disappear. And to be completely honest, that saddens, disappoints, it frustrates me. Not only because I have to work that much harder to reach more people, but also because I got into this work because I truly do care about people. I'm fully committed to doing whatever it takes to facilitate the much needed healing that needs to occur. And there are many people, whether it's pertains to some health-related issue they're struggling with, or traumatic past that's still very much with them, or other emotional wounding. There are many people who truly could heal, but they're not going to because they haven't given the process the opportunity to do what it can actually do for them, and because they do not possess the understanding or resources needed to effect healing on their own. In some of the ancient traditional cultures, there is more of an understanding of the healing process, and therefore it can be easier to work with people in these cultures. But in this modern day world here in the United States, it can be quite challenging. And for me, if I'm not taking time to do the intensive daily practice, I can feel the impact in my own body and mind as the stresses accumulate. Conversely, as I make time to do the daily practice, it enables me to digest these stresses or my own emotional responses. Mitigating any wear and tear helps me to build greater resilience. It also allows me to adapt to the ever-changing circumstances. And it helps me to come to terms with the reality that only a small percentage of people are truly willing and able to do what it takes to facilitate the much needed healing and transformation that needs to occur. And that's why I sometimes say, reach those you can, entertain the rest. For those of you who don't already know, I spent years training with a traditional Native American doctor, a medicine man, Horace Delkai from the Kiowa tribe. Horace passed on portions of his own healing gifts to me. And I've been in practice for decades now, working with people with a wide range of health-related issues, anything from digestive and respiratory disorders, people who have suffered stroke and heart attack, and working with people that have histories of trauma or one form or another, people struggling with mental health issues, autistic spectrum disorder, schizophrenia, anxiety, depression. And while I'm passionate about the work I do, and it's important to me to do everything I can from my end to facilitate the healing that needs to occur. Now, the hurts and disappointments, frustrations that we've experienced, with whether it be with friends, family, coworkers, or maybe within our intimate relationships, or with those that we've dated or wanted to partner with, take their toll. And over time, many of us become more guarded. We find it harder to open up, to trust again, fearing that we're going to be hurt once more. We become jaded, and our capacity to love and to love diminishes as parts of us shut down. As we begin to digest these hurts and disappointments or betrayals or anger, frustration, sadness, or grief, whatever we're feeling in response to what has occurred or what we've gone through, we start to feel lighter. We experience a sense of renewal. We become more naturally inclined to engage with other people, and we find ourselves drawn to healthier individuals with whom we truly resonate. We're able to connect in ways that are no longer needy or dependent on another person for our well-being, but instead are mutually nourishing. And this significantly improves the quality of our relationships, allowing us to experience deeper and more fulfilling connections. Initially, I teach people how to digest their lived experiences and emotional responses by having them close their eyes and bring a stressful issue or situation or some individual that's causing them a lot of grief or frustration, have them bring that to the forefront of their awareness. And I ask them to notice what they're feeling within their body, where these feelings or bodily sensations situated, to immerse their awareness in the depths of those feelings and sensations and breathe very softly and deeply. And yes, it's important for us to take time apart where we can do the deep internal work in order to digest our lived experiences. And yet I also want you to find practical application for these practices in your everyday life. So even when you're confronted by a stressful or a challenging situation or person, you can apply this practice. Say, for instance, you're having a conversation or you're right in the midst of a situation and you notice what you're feeling right then and there. Staying as connected as you can to what you're sensing or feeling in your body, you just continue to breathe from the depths of those feelings and bodily sensations. What I find is this helps to keep you in a much calmer and more resourceful space. You gain a lot of insight, and your responses are more proportionate or appropriate for the situation or the interaction. It helps you to better adapt and respond to people and circumstances in ways that are both more authentic and appropriate. Another thing to be mindful of is that so many of us tend to breathe high up in our chest. But the problem with shallow breathing is the stresses and distressing emotions tend to get lodged within our body. It prevents us from processing or digesting the stresses and our emotional responses. The best of your ability, I encourage you to be mindful of your breathing throughout the day, and especially when you find yourself in various situations or interactions. And start by slowing and deepening your breathing. Breathe all the way down to your abdomen. So your abdomen, as you're breathing fully, will expand a bit, and also expanding your rib cage. Just taking in as much air as you could comfortably inhale, and then exhale slowly. And as you breathe, fully immerse yourself in whatever feelings or bodily sensations you're experiencing. Breathing, as I'm describing, will greatly increase your digestive capacity. In this case, you'll be digesting both your lived experiences and your subsequent emotional responses. Many of us deny or suppress their true feelings, fearing that we're going to be perceived as weak or vulnerable, or that we'll feel overwhelmed and out of control, or simply because we don't want to go there. But it's so crucial for us to learn to embrace our vulnerability and to be present with our authentic emotional responses rather than suppressing them. And by fully immersing ourselves within these emotions and digesting our true feelings, we cultivate a deeper honesty and authenticity, both within ourselves and within our interactions with others. And this process is vital for developing resilience. As we become more present to our authentic emotional responses, opening to the full range of our feelings, we begin to experience greater love and acceptance and compassion for ourselves and for other people. And as that happens, we develop greater resilience, which allows us to navigate life's challenges with more ease, strength, and clarity. Years ago, when I struggled with the fragility that often stems from the kinds of abuses and traumas many of us have experienced during our childhood and adolescence, I was so much more sensitive to rejection. I was easily disappointed When things didn't go my way, going through a breakup or being ghosted was especially devastating. And I tended to personalize the other person's lack of receptivity and their hurtful words and actions. As the deep emotional wounds healed and I became more resilient, I stopped caring so much and was no longer operating from a place of need. There are times where I'd meet a woman I found physically attractive, but I could also sense when there was a lack of resonance. And in many instances, I could feel her emotional wounding and the limitations in her capacity to love and to be loved and to function in other areas of her life. Conversely, I could also feel when there was resonance. I could feel when the woman that I was engaging with was receptive to me and the ways in which we were compatible. And as I became more resilient, I felt much more comfortable in my interactions. I could let things unfold naturally and be okay with the outcome, even if a relationship wasn't developing in the way I initially hoped for. I stopped taking everything so personally, and when someone pulled away or wasn't receptive, I could see more clearly that in many instances, it had little to do with me. Instead, it was often a reflection of that other person's emotional wounding or limitations. And a lot of times it was because of a lack of resonance between me and that other individual. And with this deeply felt understanding within my body, I no longer internalized the words and the actions or felt diminished by the fact that we weren't connecting on a deeper level. Our world has accelerated, and it's fueled by this constant barrage of digital media that relentlessly fires off our brain's dopamine reward system. And so many of us crave instant gratification. We've been conditioned to do so by our use of digital media. Our attention span is continually shrinking as we become more and more addicted to noise and drama. And add to this the mounting pressures and demands of work and the emptiness that many of us feel, always trying to fill the void. We're easily distracted, jumping from one thing to the next, never fully present, never fully satisfied. And that can make it extraordinarily difficult for us to find the focus necessary to facilitate our healing and continued growth. And yet, we must find the determination within ourselves to make it happen. I consider myself very fortunate to have the opportunity to train with Shifu Li Tailiang in the internal martial arts of Xing Quan, Baguazhang, Tai Chi. And these individuals, over the centuries who have attained mastery in these disciplines, did so by years and years of intensive daily practice. And having the opportunity to train with Shifu, I internalized this model. And it also applies when it comes to healing. I've come to realize that building resilience is this ongoing intensive process that involves practice, application, on a daily basis. Working effectively with our emotions is such a crucial part of building resilience. It helps us to better understand ourselves, to communicate more effectively, to establish clear and healthy boundaries. And as we cultivate a more intimate relationship with ourselves, we also increase our capacity to love and to be loved. By being present and breathing into any feelings and bodily sensations that arise, you can more thoroughly digest both your lived experiences along with the emotional responses and stresses that you've internalized, rather than allowing them to accumulate. Consistent practice will enable you to connect more deeply with yourself, discern what you truly need, and also understand when it's best to let go. As I mentioned before, it's not that you always have to go off and sit quietly with the feelings and sensations. It's also about using these tools in the midst of your everyday life. So whenever you're feeling triggered, you're stressed out, or you're overwhelmed, these practices will help you to stay grounded and to navigate the emotional turbulence that invariably arises, allowing you to respond more thoughtfully and less reactively. And over time, you'll find that this ongoing work not only deepens your self-awareness, but also transforms the way you relate to yourself and others. It's an ongoing process of learning, adapting, and evolving, one that's essential for building true resilience. Also, when it comes to resilience, do keep in mind that there are other components. For instance, food is fuel, eating the healthiest, most nutrient-rich foods that you can, because the foods that nourish your body help to increase your resilience. Also, getting adequate sleep and exercise. Sleep is the time when your body and mind regenerate, processing and integrating the experiences of your day. And without enough rest, we're more likely to feel emotionally fragile and overwhelmed. And we find it more difficult to cope with stress. So make sure, well, to the best of your ability, be getting enough sleep. Also, exercise, it's not only beneficial for physical health, but for mental and emotional well-being, because it helps to release the buildup tensions and stress, and it boosts the mood-enhancing neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. It leaves us feeling more grounded and centered. Engage in whatever physical activity you most enjoy. And even something as simple as going for a walk is an essential means of maintaining and cultivating resilience. Also, while solitude is an essential part of our process, resilience isn't built solely in isolation. It's also cultivated through the connections we share with other individuals. So when we're facing life challenges, having a strong support network, whether it be with friends or family or classmates or coworkers, just whoever you connect with that you feel nurtured by, that you enjoy the connection with, is an important part of cultivating resilience, because we nourish and sustain one another when we listen, understanding one another, and simply by just being present. Being open, authentic, and vulnerable in our interactions with those who play an important part of our lives helps us to gain perspective. It also helps us to process our lived experiences and to navigate the challenges more effectively. And within these connections, we also find strength, nurturing one another as we grow and heal. Resilience is essential because it shapes our ability to recover from setbacks and to adapt to the changes occurring within us and the world around us. And as we learn to navigate life's transitions, we build a foundation of self-compassion and trust in our ability to handle life's inevitable changes. And in relationships, resilience helps us to let go of, again, the unhealthy attachments, and to embrace what truly serves our growth. Cultivating resilience transforms the way that we relate to others. We naturally begin to attract companions who resonate with us on a deeper level. We stop seeking validation, clinging to relationships out of fear, and instead we engage with those who support our growth and well-being. It's about connecting in ways that are mutually nourishing and fulfilling. Ultimately, resilience is about transforming our life's most challenging experiences and our emotional responses, using them as fuel for growth and empowerment. And when it comes to cultivating resilience, it's crucial for us to be making use of the most effective therapeutic interventions. My own journey has been deeply influenced by my training with the traditional Native American doctor, the medicine man that I mentioned earlier. A significant part of the training I go through, the Vision Quest, the traditional Native healing practice that involves going out to fast alone in the mountains for 4 days and nights with no food and water. And there are times during the Vision Quest where I feel this extraordinarily powerful presence descending into my body. There are moments where it's been like a near-death experience. Events from my past, often past traumas or other deeply challenging experiences, all that would be flooding back into my awareness, and all the emotions related to it. I'd be reliving these experiences, but I could feel this presence helping me to digest and transform these experiences in a way so that they became fuel for growth. And as that's happened, I've become so much more resilient, lighter, freer, more capable of living and engaging in the world around me. Like the indigenous healers among the Native Americans and other indigenous peoples, I work as a conduit, allowing an extraordinarily powerful presence to work through me. So in these individual sessions, whether it's someone who's been seriously injured in an automobile accident, or suffered a catastrophic illness such as heart attack or stroke or cancer, or that has undergone invasive treatments such as chemo, radiation, and surgery, or those who have endured neglect or childhood traumas, emotional, physical, sexual abuse. These sessions facilitate healing within the body and mind while building in greater resilience. I work with people individually, either remotely or in person, so do feel free to reach out to me if I could be of assistance. Thank you for joining me for this presentation. And if you haven't already done so, just take a moment, look below. If you're seeing this on YouTube, click like, subscribe. Also, do feel free to share this video with anyone who you feel will benefit.